My corner of the world was quiet, a half-acre of green where the bees hummed and Pixel, my mutt, chased fireflies. The creek along the easement was my favorite part, its soft gurgle a daily reminder of why I'd chosen this rural neighborhood. The deed was clear. The creek's bank was mine, part of a shared easement no neighbor could claim. I thought everyone understood that. Then Karen Davis moved in next door. It started with a few wooden posts. I came home one muggy afternoon to find Karen hammering them into the ground along our boundary, inches from the creek. A roll of wire fencing leaned against her truck. She was building a barrier to cut off my access, her face set in a scowl that dared me to object. I took a breath and walked over, keeping my tone light. Karen, that's the easement. Nobody owns it outright. I've got the survey if you want to see. She barely glanced up. HOA says I can fence my side, keeps riffraff out. Her eyes flicked toward my beehives as if they were the problem. I'd dealt with prickly neighbors before. I went inside, pulled the plat map from my safe, and printed a copy of the county's easement rules. The documents were unambiguous. No structures could block shared access. Back outside, I handed her the papers. This shows the boundary. The creek's open to both of us. Karen tossed the papers onto the dirt. HOA trumps your little map. I'm protecting my property value. She drove another post, the clang echoing like a challenge. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I emailed the HOA board, attaching the survey and asking for clarification. Their reply was swift. No approval had been granted for Karen's fence. Emboldened, I knocked on her door that evening, HOA email in hand. Karen, the board did okay this. You need to move the posts. Her face reddened. You think you're smarter than me? I'll have the sheriff sort you out. She slammed the door, leaving me standing on her porch, documents fluttering in the breeze. The next morning, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Deputy Rogers, a lanky man with a no-nonsense drawl, stepped out. Karen trailed him, arms crossed, smirking like she'd already won. I handed Rogers my folder, deed, survey, plat map, HOA email. He skimmed them, then turned to Karen. Ma'am, this easement's on his deed. Your fence is illegal. Take it down. He tipped his hat. Have a pleasant day. Karen's smirk vanished. She muttered something about city lawyers and stormed inside. Rogers gave me a nod. Call if she keeps at it. As he drove off, I felt a flicker of relief. The law was on my side, the HOA had spoken, and Karen had no ground to stand on. But relief was premature. That evening, I caught Karen on her porch, phone pressed to her ear, voice low but sharp, and not letting him win. Get the board to push it through. She didn't see me, but her words sent a chill. This wasn't about a fence anymore, it was personal. I locked my gate and checked the creek. The posts were still there, wire fencing now half unrolled. Karen wasn't backing down, she was doubling down. I knew then that politeness wouldn't end this. I'd need more than documents to protect my land. The spark had caught and the fire was coming. The air felt wrong when I pulled into my drive. My fence was slashed in 3 places, wires curling like broken springs. Deep tire tracks scarred the creek bank, mud churned into ruts. One of my beehives lay in ruins, frames splintered, honey seeping into the grass like blood. Worst of all, Pixel, my loyal mutt, yelped as he limped toward me, a nail embedded in his paw from a board half buried by the fence line. I knelt beside him, heart pounding. The vet removed the nail, prescribed antibiotics, and warned of infection. As Pixel rested, my shock hardened into resolve. This wasn't a dispute anymore, it was war. Karen had crossed a line and I wasn't playing defense any longer. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras online, the kind that ping your phone with alerts every 10 seconds until you mute them. Next, I called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for precision and grit. She arrived the next day, her truck loaded with fluorescent stakes and laminated placards. Tampering with survey markers is a crime, she said, hammering stakes into the corners of my property. Her signs, bold and legal, warned of felony charges for interference. Nora's stakes glowed like beacons, a clear message to Karen. I wasn't backing down, but I knew she wouldn't either. That night at 1:13 a.m., my phone lit up with camera alerts. I opened the live feed and froze. Two figures moved in the moonlight, one tall, wielding bolt cutters, the other shorter, with platinum blonde hair glinting under a hoodie. Karen, the tall one, yanked Nora's stakes, tossing them into the creek with a splash. His face caught the light just long enough for me to pause the frame. I didn't know him, but I had his image. I called Deputy Rogers at dawn, emailing him the footage. He arrived within the hour, squinting at the stills on my phone. "That's Chandler Hayes," he said, voice flat. "Local troublemaker, been on probation since 21 for fraud." Rogers knew Chandler's face from past calls, and Karen was unmistakable. He secured a warrant for criminal mischief and trespassing, and by 7 a.m., he and two deputies were at Chandler's door. Body cam footage later showed Chandler in sagging pajama pants, insisting he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up my camera still, Chandler mid-snarl, gripping bolt cutters. Care to explain this? Chandler's mouth shut like a trap. At Karen's house, the deputies found more. Nora's stolen stakes stacked in her garage, her laminated signs crumpled beside a can of spray paint, neon red, the same color defacing my no trespassing signs. Karen claimed Chandler stored tools without her knowledge, but the paint can was hers, bought at the local hardware store. Rogers arrested them both. Karen made bond by lunchtime, her lawyer already spinning excuses. Chandler wasn't so lucky. His 2021 probation for check kiting meant a no-bond hold pending a hearing. As the cruiser pulled away, I checked Pixel's paw and reset the cameras. The evidence was ironclad, but Karen's quick release gnawed at me. She'd lost this round, but her glare from the sheriff's visit still lingered. I knew she'd try again. The creek murmured outside, and Pixel slept by the fire. I saved the camera footage to 2 hard drives and emailed copies to my lawyer, Elliot. This fight was far from over, but I was ready. With Chandler in jail, the fight took a new turn. My lawyer, Elliot, sensed the gate Karen installed wasn't just vandalism, it smelled like a scheme. We subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, targeting the $3,500 used for her illegal fence. The trail led to a cashier's check, signed by Chandler, drawn from the HOA's reserve account. It wasn't pocket change, it was a red flag. Elliot dug deeper, and the numbers told a grim story. Chandler, the HOA's bookkeeper, had written checks totaling $46,900 over 2 years for grounds improvements, phantom projects like new sod, a gazebo that never existed, and benches nobody saw. The gate was just the latest fraud, a sloppy move that cracked the facade. Each check bore Chandler's signature, stamped with a neon green approval mark that screamed forgery. The HOA board was stunned. At an emergency meeting, they voted unanimously to press charges. Residents packed the room, furious at the betrayal. I sat in the back, watching neighbors who'd once ignored Karen's antics demand answers. The board hired Detective Miriam Page from the county's white-collar crime unit. Page, sharp and relentless, seized Chandler's home computer and cracked it open like a walnut. What she found was a goldmine of deceit. Forged receipts for fake landscaping, doctored meeting minutes claiming board approval, and a word template for those neon green stamps. Worse, bank records showed Chandler funneled $12,000 to Karen's personal account, labeled as consulting fees. Karen, a retired office manager with no landscaping expertise, had no contract with the HOA. The payments were a kickback, plain and simple. Karen lawyered up fast. James Hall, a $600 an hour attorney, swept in with a tailored suit and a wall of silence. He filed motions to dismiss, claiming Karen was a victim of Chandler's schemes, but the evidence was stacking against her. My ring camera footage placed her SUV at the creek the night Nora's stakes vanished, and the spray paint in her garage matched the vandalism on my signs. Hall could spin, but he couldn't erase the truth. Chandler, meanwhile, was sinking. His 2021 check kiting probation meant new felony charges could lock him up for years. Facing a revoked bond and a grim future, he cut a deal with the DA. He'd testify against Karen, every detail of their plot, in exchange for a lighter sentence. Page grilled him for hours, cross-referencing his story with bank records and my footage. Chandler's confession was a turning point. Karen had orchestrated the land grab, using HOA funds to bankroll it, with Chandler as her paper-pushing accomplice. The HOA board didn't stop at charges. They froze Chandler's accounts, hired an auditor to scour past budgets, and drafted new bylaws for transparency. Residents formed a watchdog group, vowing to keep the board honest. I felt a quiet pride, not just for my land, but for the community waking up. The creek still flowed, Pixel's paw was healing, and my cameras stood watch. But the fight wasn't over. Karen's lawyer was circling, and Chandler's testimony was a wild card. I backed up my footage again, sent Elliot the latest HOA records, and checked the stakes Nora had replaced. The law was closing in, and for the first time I sensed the tide turning. These were small wins, but they felt like the start of something bigger. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension. Months of legal battles had led to this, a reckoning for Karen and Chandler. Chandler, pale and slouched, had already pled guilty to violating his 2021 probation for check kiting, earning an automatic 18-month sentence. New felony charges loomed: theft, conspiracy, and fraud. Cornered, he took a deal: 4 years, parole in 2 if he testified against Karen. The DA called him to the stand, and the room leaned forward. Chandler's voice was low but clear. He detailed Karen's plan: annex my land for the HOA, sell it for profit, and split the cash. She promised him a cut if he forged checks, cut fences, and pulled stakes under moonlight. She said it was foolproof, he muttered, glancing at Karen. Her face was stone, but her lawyer, James Hall, scribbled furiously. The prosecutor played my Ring camera footage on a courtroom screen. At 12:47 a.m., Karen and Chandler loaded rebar into her SUV, their faces lit by the creek's reflection. The timestamp matched the night Nora's stakes vanished. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Hall objected: chain of custody relevance, but the judge overruled. The footage was damning, and my cameras, once a desperate purchase, were now the star witness. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreperson's voice was steady. Guilty on all counts: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespass. Karen's shoulders sagged. Chandler stared at the floor. The judge sentenced Karen to 18 months in prison, $32,000 restitution to me for damages, and $46,900 to the HOA for the embezzled funds. A 5-year no-contact order would follow her release. Chandler's sentencing was deferred, his deal pending parole review, but his prison time was certain. As deputies cuffed Karen, I caught her eye. Her glare was sharp, but it held no power anymore. I raised my hand in a small, deliberate wave, not out of spite, but because it felt like closing a book. She looked away, led through a side door. The courtroom emptied, but I lingered, letting the weight of victory settle. My land was mine, the creek still flowed, and justice had teeth. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the promise of spring. I drove home, checking Pixel's healed paw in the beehives, now buzzing with life. The fluorescent stakes Nora had replaced stood firm, and my cameras hummed quietly, their alerts silent for the first time in months. Elliot called to confirm the restitution process. The HOA's auditor was already clawing back Chandler's assets. It wasn't just my win, it was the neighborhood. The HOA board, chastened by the scandal, sent a letter promising transparency and new oversight. Neighbors who'd once shrugged at Karen's antics now nodded to me at the mailbox, a quiet acknowledgement of the fight I'd waged. Sprout Tomorrow, the nonprofit eyeing Karen's old property, reached out about a pollinator garden. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her land, once a battleground, could become a place of growth. I walked the creek that evening, Pixel trotting beside me. The water caught the sunset, and the bees droned softly. The fight had cost time, money, and sleep, but it had forged something stronger: certainty in my rights, trust in my instincts. Karen and Chandler were gone, their schemes reduced to court filings. I wasn't just reclaiming my land, I was building something new on it. The seeds of that future were already taking root. The dust of the courtroom settled, and my land began to breathe again. The HOA, reborn under a new board, sent a letter of apology, their words formal but sincere. Enclosed was a $4,500 check, clawed back from Chandler's frozen accounts to repair my shattered beehives. I held the check, feeling the weight of the fight behind it. This wasn't just money, it was proof that justice could rebuild what greed had broken. I didn't waste time. Where Karen's illegal fence once stood, I built a greenhouse, its glass panels catching the morning sun. The air inside hummed with possibility, thick with the scent of fresh soil and tomato seedlings. I replanted the bee frames, and the hives came alive again, their soft drone a reminder of resilience. Pixel, his paw fully healed, bounded through the grass, chasing dragonflies along the creek. The fluorescent stakes Nora had set gleamed unchallenged, and my cameras stood silent, their alerts no longer needed. Corinne's property, the heart of her schemes, changed hands. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, bought it at auction. The irony was sharp and satisfying. Her land, once a symbol of division, would now feed the community. Their director, Lena, called me one evening, her voice warm with enthusiasm. "We're planning pollinator gardens," she said. "Your bees could thrive with native plants. Would you consult?" I agreed, intrigued by the chance to turn a battleground into a haven. My first meeting with Sprout Tomorrow was at the creek's edge, where Corinne's old lawn met my property. Lena unrolled a blueprint, milkweed, coneflowers, and bee balm designed to draw pollinators and beauty. I suggested adding asters for late-season blooms, drawing on years of tending my hives. Neighbors stopped by, curious, some offering to volunteer. A few who'd once avoided my gaze during Corinne's reign now shook my hand. "You did right," one said, nodding toward the stakes. The community was knitting itself back together, and I was part of it. Evenings found me in the greenhouse, pruning seedlings under the soft glow of string lights. Pixel curled up nearby, his snores a quiet counterpoint to the crickets outside. The creek murmured, its banks untouched by tire tracks or vandalism. I thought of Corinne, now behind bars, and Chandler facing his own reckoning. Their schemes had cost me sleep and money, but they'd also sharpened my resolve. I'd fought with evidence, cameras, surveys, subpoenas, and one more than my land. I'd reclaimed peace. The HOA's reforms took root, too. They published budgets online, held open forums, and installed a lockbox for reserve funds. The board invited me to a meeting, not as a complainant, but as a neighbor. I declined, preferring the quiet of my greenhouse, but their gesture mattered. The neighborhood felt lighter, as if Corinne's shadow had finally lifted. Sprout Tomorrow's plans grew bolder. Lena emailed about a grant for native plants, asking for my input on the proposal. I spent a Saturday drafting suggestions, picturing butterflies over the creek. The work felt like a bridge between my past fight and a future where my land and Corinne's could nurture something greater. The bees, oblivious to the drama, kept pollinating, and Pixel's tail thumped as I tossed him a stick. As spring approached, I ordered lumber for a small barn, planning to use the $4,500 to store tools and hay. The greenhouse glowed at dusk, a beacon of what I'd built from the ashes of conflict. Closure wasn't just Corinne's sentence or Chandler's confession, it was this: soil under my nails, bees in the air, and a dog at my side. The fight was over, but the growing had just begun. A year after the courtroom victory, a letter arrived, its crisp envelope belying the trouble inside. Elaine Castor, claiming to be Corinne's heir, demanded a private right-of-way across my land to the creek. The attached deed, stamped with a notary's seal, looked convincing at first glance. But I'd learned from Corinne's schemes. This smelled like a ploy to stir uncertainty, maybe force a payout. I forwarded it to Elliot, my lawyer, who'd become as much a friend as a legal shield. Elliot was relentless. He cross-checked county records, found the notary seal was outdated, and traced the deed's formatting to a template used in a 2022 fraud case. The document was a fake, as flimsy as Corinne's old excuses. We filed a motion to dismiss, and Elaine, sensing defeat, withdrew her claim before the hearing. I didn't celebrate, just checked my cameras and walked the creek, ensuring Nora's stakes still stood. Vigilance had saved me before, it would again. Restitution checks began trickling in from the state's victim fund. Corinne's prison wages, garnished at $58 a month, arrived in small envelopes, pennies compared to the $32,000 she owed me, but each check was a reminder of accountability. The HOA's $46,900 claim moved slower, but their auditor was tenacious, seizing Chandler's old truck to chip away at the debt. The symbolism mattered more than the dollars. Justice wasn't just a verdict, it was a process. Then came a surprise, a letter from Chandler postmarked from prison. His handwriting was neat, almost contrite. He apologized for the vandalism, the fraud, and the chaos he'd helped unleash. "I was greedy," he wrote. "You didn't deserve it." Enclosed was a hand-drawn map suggesting orchard placements for my land, apple trees by the creek, pears near the greenhouse. He'd earned a paralegal certificate behind bars, a step towards something better. I read it twice, then penned a reply. "Sunflowers are taller than ever," I wrote, leaving the orchard open. Forgiveness wasn't a promise, but it was a door I'd cracked. Sprout Tomorrow's garden, blooming on Karen's old property, became the neighborhood's heart. Their first volunteer day drew dozens, kids with shovels, retirees hauling mulch, even Deputy Rogers in a flannel wielding a rake. I loaned my brush cutter, its roar blending with laughter as we cleared Karen's lawn for raised beds. Lena, the nonprofit's director, unveiled plans for a butterfly meadow, crediting my pollinator advice. I suggested goldenrod for fall blooms, picturing my bees dancing over the creek. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years clapped me on the shoulder, their thanks unspoken but clear. Evenings I'd sit in the greenhouse, Pixel snoring at my feet, and watch the sunset paint the creek gold. The fight with Karen had scarred this land, but it had also shaped it. Her greed had backfired, turning her property into a community garden and my half-acre into a sanctuary. The bees hummed, the stakes held firm, and Elaine's letter was just a footnote. I'd won not by hatting Karen, but by building something she couldn't touch. Sprout Tomorrow invited me to speak at their next fundraiser, a nod to my role in the land's transformation. I hesitated, publicity wasn't my style, but agreed to share a few words about resilience. As I jotted notes, I thought of Chandler's map, Karen's garnished wages, and the garden replacing her lawn. The circle was complete, from conflict to creation, from division to unity. The creek kept flowing, and so did I, ready for whatever came next. Karen's old property, once a stage for her schemes, bloomed into something new. Sprout Tomorrow, the organic farming nonprofit, transformed her lawn into a tapestry of raised beds and pollinator gardens. Tomato vines curled skyward and bee balm swayed in the breeze, drawing my bees across the creek. The land that had sparked so much strife now pulsed with life, a quiet rebuke to her greed. I joined their mission, consulting on native plants to boost pollinators. Milkweed for monarchs, coneflowers for bees. I told Lena, the director, sketching a layout for a butterfly meadow. She beamed, incorporating my ideas into their grant proposal. On their first volunteer day, I brought my brush cutter, its roar blending with the chatter of neighbors. Kids hauled compost, retirees planted seedlings, and Deputy Rogers showed up, trading his badge for a shovel. New HOA members, eager to mend past wrongs, rolled up their sleeves. We tilled Karen's old turf into rich soil, each spadeful a step toward healing. The work was more than physical. Neighbors who'd once sidestepped my fight with Karen now shared stories over wheelbarrows, their laughter weaving a new community thread. Rogers, pausing to wipe sweat, grinned at me. Never thought I'd garden where I served warrants. I chuckled, handing him a water bottle. The irony was thick. Karen had wielded HOA rules to divide us, but her land now united us in sweat and purpose. By noon, rows of zucchini and sunflowers stood where her fence posts had loomed. Lena unveiled a sign, Sprout Tomorrow Community Garden, and thanked me for sparking the change. I shrugged, pointing to the group. This is all of us. But inside, I felt a quiet pride. The fight for my land had rippled outward, turning a personal victory into a shared one. As the sun dipped, I walked the creek, Pixel trotting beside me. The garden scent, fresh earth and basil, mingled with the water's murmur. Karen's schemes, Elaine's forged deed, Chandler's fraud, they were ghosts now, fighting against the reality of growth. This land, once a battleground, was now a gift to the neighborhood. The final victory wasn't just mine, it was every seed planted, every hand that helped. We turned division into abundance, and that was enough. October brought a golden glow to the creek, and with it, Sprout Tomorrow's first harvest dinner. The community garden, thriving on Karen's former property, yielded a bounty. Butternut squash roasted to caramelized perfection, honey-glazed carrots with a hint of my bees' work, and heirloom tomato bruschetta bursting with summer's memory. Tables lined the garden's edge, draped in checkered cloths as neighbors gathered under string lights. Lena, the nonprofit's director, raised a glass to the land's transformation, her voice carrying over the chatter. This was a place of conflict, she said, nodding toward the creek. Now it's a place of nourishment, thanks to all of you. Eyes turned to me and a few clapped. I stood, cheeks warm, and waved it off. I just fought for my land, I said. You all made this. But as I sat, I felt the weight of their gratitude. The garden wasn't just a victory over Karen, it was a shared redemption, rooted in soil we'd tilled together. The dinner buzzed with laughter, kids darting between rows of sunflowers, their petals still bright despite the autumn chill. Deputy Rogers, now a regular at Sprout Tomorrow events, swapped stories with new HOA members, their once-tense meetings replaced by camaraderie. I passed a plate of zucchini fritters, savoring the moment. Corinne's schemes, her fence, her fraud, her glare, felt like a distant storm, its thunder long faded. This land, once scarred by tire tracks and vandalism, now fed us all. I'd been busy, too. With the $4,500 from the HOA, I'd built a barn where Corinne's illegal posts once stood. The frame was sturdy, its wood reclaimed from her old shed, torn down after Sprout Tomorrow's purchase. Each plank, weathered but strong, told a story of resilience. I'd gotten the permits, hired a local carpenter, and spent weekends hammering nails beside him. The barn smelled of cedar and hay, a place for tools, beehive frames, and dreams of a small orchard, maybe Chandler's apple trees if I felt generous. Pixel loved it. He'd race through the fields, tail ablur, then flop in the barn's shade, free from the nailboards and chaos of that awful spring. His paw, fully healed, left prints in the soft earth near the greenhouse, where tomato vines still clung to their stakes. The bees hummed, their hives thriving, and the creek murmured its steady song. This was peace, not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. I thought of Corinne, her prison wages trickling in, and Chandler studying law behind bars. Their choices had burned bridges, but mine had built them. The barn, the garden, the greenhouse, they were more than structures. They were proof that hostility could be outgrown, that greed could be outlasted. Sprout Tomorrow's sign, hand-painted and proud, stood where Corinne's fence once loomed. Every squash, every bloom was a quiet middle finger to her legacy. As the dinner wound down, Lena pulled me aside. "We're nomming a pollinator bed after your bees," she said. I laughed, touched but practical. "Name it for the community," I suggested. "They're the ones who showed up," she nodded, but I knew they'd do it anyway. I didn't mind. The real victory was here, in the clink of glasses, the scent of fresh basil, and Pixel's contented sprawl under the table. I walked home that night, the creek silver under the moon. The barn loomed dark and solid, a sentinel of what I'd reclaimed. Corinne's shadow was gone, replaced by roots and laughter. Pixel trotted beside me, and I scratched his ears, my steps light. We'd earned this peace, and it was sweeter than any harvest.